Good morning. Good morning. I'm late, 1 minute. So I know in the Netherlands it's quite normal to start 1 minute late, but we are over time already. But sit back and relax, because we're going to travel to 2030. Wow, that's not optimization of the next quarter financials. It's about thinking how we can avoid that in 10 years' time, or 2030 is even 12 years' time, that at that time we won't tell our kids or grandkids that we have been part of the tobacco industry after all. So that is actually one of my great worries when I sit at night with my kids and during dinner, and I see their addiction to that little thing in front of them. And I wonder what I am doing, if it's really good in helping society, in bringing up kids that are social, that are human, that are optimistic, that do all the stuff, are athletic. That I like to think about myself I was when I was young. So to help us with our journey and our responsibility, I think, for society, we need to get lead speakers from around the world to help us in this journey, how we can contribute as an important player in Danish society to this, I think, universal challenge of technology. So therefore, I'm super happy that we have Dr. Olaf Groth, I hope I pronounced it right, who is amazingly experienced in this part of the business. And for 2 hours, or 1 hour, 1.5 hours, I think, we can listen and to suck up all his experience and his thoughts, and because he's thinking about this his entire day. So that's good for us to take it with us in our daily job. After that, we will have a one-to-one conversation with our own internal star of AI and robotics, Mr. Jonas Munk, who will be interviewing Olaf. So I'm looking forward to that conversation as well, because normally if Jonas starts talking, I cannot really follow him, but hopefully this will be better. So, of course, everybody can tune in with questions. This is the way how we do it as always. So if you have questions for Jonas to be asked in the Q&A later on, then this is the way to influence the discussion. I'm looking forward. I will sit back and relax, and I will hand over the stage to you. A big applause.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very glad to be here with you. I want to thank TDC. I want to thank Jaap and Jonas and my friend Christian Kindler for having me here today. I'm very glad to be talking to you about what I believe to be the most important issue of our time, and that is the future of humanity and how we as business people can empower humans. I have done a great deal of preparation with the help of your colleagues here, and I hope to have an engaging conversation with you, because I believe you are one of the most important agents in this transformation as TDC, as the backbone of Danish society and beyond. I want to play for you a video that the World Economic Forum has produced. As a quick one-minute video, and then I want to take that apart a little bit and tell you why I think we need to go well beyond what is shown here. Take a quick listen. Now, you will have heard about this. This is what we generally call the fourth industrial revolution. The Germans call this Industry 4.0. Both of these are inherently limited in their notion of what is actually happening to us in society. I want to point to a better notion, and that is Society 5.0, spearheaded by the Japanese, a much better concept because it is more holistic. The Japanese understand that what we're talking about is a fundamental transformation of society. Obviously, it's business forward, business leads jointly with science. But at the end of the day, it's about who we become as human beings. And for us, as businesses, the question is, how do we shape that? How do we empower people? What do we do to make this actually a better society? Not just a better economy, not just a better industry, but a better society. And at the center of that are people. People, families, communities, societies. At the end of the day, we as business people exist because there is no better way at creating solutions for society that make people's lives richer, more fulfilling, more satisfying, more productive, and also more prosperous and more happy. That's our justification for being in business. It's not about the stock price, it's not about the shareholder. All of those are mechanisms to incentivize us to do right by people, make life better in society. This is really at the heart and at the center of what I do these days. I'm a professor of business with a strong focus on business within global society. Right now, a lot of governments around the world are waking up to the fact that this is a trend that is going to change the nature of their electorates, the nature of their citizenry. How should they get ahead of this? Governments are notoriously slow in preparing for these types of things. Some governments are more on the avant-garde than others. But all of them are now engaging in this dialogue, and I'm very glad that they are, because we need to prepare for this radical change. That is also why we've written the book, Solomon's Code, Humanity in a World of Thinking Machines being another way of expressing artificial intelligence, which is a bit of an overhyped, ambiguous term for thinking machines, for machine learning, machines that learn about life and about us. As we went around the world to conduct about 100+ interviews, we felt that the real questions here are not about business models. Those can be designed. They're really about what's the model of a human? How is our human existence starting to change? This is personal, by the way. This is not just about you. This is not just about our customers. This is about me, too. I understand what this means, but I wouldn't have understood this if there hadn't been a call from my CEO about 3 years ago during the summer. I live in Silicon Valley, as you may know, but am European by heritage, and so I had just come back from Europe, from a family vacation in Europe, where my boss, Stephen Hodges, calls me and said, "Olaf, I really need you to come back to Europe within the next 3 days." And I'm like, "Stephen, I'm sorry, I just got back. It's my daughter's birthday. What could possibly be so important for me to return to Europe on short notice?" And he said, "Well, we are developing a teaching game, a computer simulation that's a smart simulation. And we need some of our best professors to teach up against this game." And I said, "Well, wait a minute, Steve, are you actually saying that I should return to Europe to throw myself under the bus so you can test how to replace me with a machine?" And he said, "Well, that is one way to look at it. I'm sure there are other ways to look at it." And of course, he was right. Right? At Hult, we practice growth mindset, and growth mindset means you're not afraid of change. You prepare for change by growing yourself. And so I thought about this for a while, and I said, this is probably a good opportunity for me to understand what is special about me vis-a-vis a machine. And maybe it's time for me to drop the things that compete with the machine and emphasize those things that are differentiated, that are defensible, that are sustainable. So I went and I taught up against the machine. This is a, mind you, pre-beta version of the game 3 years ago, which has been developed quite a bit by now. But even back then, what turned out is that the machine can prepare students. There was a cohort of about 40 undergraduate students from some of the best schools around the London area, could do just as well as I could in preparing students with hard knowledge for tests, the kinds of standardized tests that we're all used to, that nobody really likes. Few people think prepare people for life, but everybody does. Those tests, the machine could already prepare for about as well as I could. What the machine couldn't do is prepare the students for a real live human interaction, a conversation with a bunch of McKinsey partners that were putting the students through real-world case studies, where you need to understand body language and gestures and intonation and sentiments. You need to actually understand what picture is developing in your conversation partners' heads. For that, a human can still educate and train and coach and mentor human students much better than a machine can. Is that going to stay the case? I'm going to show you some examples that are hopefully going to be quite thought-provoking, because even that is going to come under fire. For now, however, that is my defensibility as a professor. Less lecturing, less teaching of sort of hard content that is testable, more interpersonal coaching on life situations. So if we, if you, if your customers don't internally prepare for this new future on the inside, with their heads, in their heads, with themselves, for themselves, they're going to be overtaken by change, and change is the machine. So the biggest question of the day is, how will digital disruption change the nature of humanity? The biggest question in my mind for you as TDC, such an important, pivotal company in Denmark, is how can TDC empower humanity through disruptive technologies in Society 5.0? Remember, it's about society, it's about people. It's not just about business models. How can we do that? Well, there's a couple of different schools of thought about how this is going to pan out. You've heard some of these already. The upper left-hand corner is representative of today. This is what Joy Ito referenced in his interview with President Obama in Wired magazine, publicly available on the web if you want to research it. And he said, you know, my students at MIT Media Lab are not going to like this very much, but this is a bunch of young people, mostly white males, mostly introverted. They would much rather all of us humans sit on a couch and let them program machines to run the world. Why? Because they don't like the complexity, the innate emotionality, the non-linearity of human beings. A machine can be much more apolitical, much more clean in its argumentation, and therefore is preferable in their minds. Of course, that's a problem, because we as human beings are nonlinear, we're complex, we are emotional for good reason. So we need to do something about this picture. The people in the upper right-hand corner you know well, Mr. Musk and Mr. Hawking, and they have prophesied that the machines are at some point going to become so sophisticated that they figure out that we as human beings are non-optimizable functions, right? And therefore, the machine will figure out that we are much better to be enslaved somewhere or killed, or that some evildoer will hijack the machines to do that to us, sideline us. Very dark vision, of course. The gentleman on the lower left has popularized the term singularity, which means different things. Mr. Kurzweil here, but it essentially means that machines will become as smart as we are, maybe smarter, and that at some point we might even become part of machines, or machines will become part of us. You may have heard the term cyborg or synthetic biology, and there's good precedent for that already. DARPA tells us that within 7 years they're ready for human-machine brain interfaces on a commercial basis. So we are already on our path to the singularity, if that's the definition that you adhere to. Whether or not that's something that you find aspirational, I will leave to you. The lower right-hand corner is a school of thought espoused by Stuart Russell and the Center for Human Compatible AI at UC Berkeley that says the machine always has to understand the human being, understand us in our goals, however irrational they are, however emotional they are, and empower those goals. Drive us, help us make better decisions that are in our interests. That, to me, ladies and gentlemen, is the world that I think we should be aiming toward. We need to go straight from the upper left-hand corner to the lower right-hand corner and bypass the upper right-hand corner altogether. Whether we're going to have a little bit of the lower left-hand corner remains to be seen. But that, to me, is the future that we should be aspiring to, the lower right-hand corner. How do we get there? Well, I think we need to pay attention to three things. The first one is we need to be values-based. Difficult conversation, very messy, especially across country borders, ethics and values. But we must have the conversation. What does it actually mean to be human? What do we want that to mean? We need to take a look through that lens at things like power. Power of human beings, and how do we as TDC, as corporations, support that human power? Secondly, what is the human position in our ecosystems, in society, in industry, in the economy, vis-a-vis the machine? And thirdly, persona. What do I mean by persona? What is your persona as an individual and as an organization? Do you, as TDC, live the values that you want a human or humane society to live? Or are you a facilitator of machines and robots that will simply enable efficiency in the economy? Those are two very different things, and that's a big strategic challenge. Let's start with the first one, human power in the autonomy economy. More and more decisions being made for us by machine learning. Very subtle, but it's happening. So, this man here is somebody you know well. There are very few things that I agree with him on, but this particular statement I do agree with. Those who master artificial intelligence will eventually run the world. Because that's already what is happening. It's just not one politician, it's a bunch of internet companies that are doing this really well, that are doing this largely to our benefit. But they're doing it in such a way that it is starting to encroach on our human agency and our choice. I'm not saying we shouldn't want that. We should want it. We don't want to turn back time. We can't. Okay, we shouldn't. But we should steer into this brave new world of the cognitive era, meaning machines becoming more and more cognitive, intelligent. We should do so intelligently ourselves and ahead of time. Consider this. There are about 100 billion neurons in our brains. Incidentally, there's the same number of stars in the universe. It's an interesting little tidbit, but beside the point, I might argue. 100 billion neurons. There's about 7 billion people in this world. At any point in your lives, maybe over the course of your lives, you have a realistic chance of crossing paths with, I don't know, maybe 500 million. Right? So there's 100 billion neurons, and there is about 500 million people. Now think about all those neurons firing, and think about all the interactions you have. It's a daunting scale, but it's nothing as daunting as what's coming. What's coming is that we are walking toward a world of 340 trillion IP addresses in this world, where every device around us, every device on us, clothing, wearable devices, forget mobile phones, cars, and homes, they're being wired up already. Even some parts inside of us. You have a medical implant of some sort, that will be radio wired and will have an IP address. Everything you touch will have an IP address. Your glasses will have an IP address. Your smart retinas may become networked and have an IP address. 340 trillion IP addresses, all communicating with each other amongst 7, soon to be 8 billion people. How are we going to define human power, human self-expression, our own will as human beings in that world of constantly firing neurons, constantly firing IP addresses? What's the human empowerment in all of this? Big question, especially since the volume of data is stunning. The volume of data is projected to be about 160 zettabytes by 2025. Only that, at the moment, we are predicting that 3% of that data is going to be tagged, meaning identified. Only 0.5% of that data is actually analyzed to where we can make sense of it. The rest of it is noise. I'm not saying it's garbage. I'm not saying it's worthless. There are treasure troves of insight in that data. But it's a stunning amount of data that we currently do not have any capability of analyzing, of making sense of. So imagine the 340 trillion IP addresses generating all this data that we can't make sense of, that is noise. How will we as humans express ourselves? What is your role in all of this as a telecommunications company? Right? Very big questions. Big opportunity. We're looking at a 180-fold increase in terabytes per second data exchanged, 11 trillion worth of opportunity by 2020, according to McKinsey. And of course, the thing about the data that is most important is our life patterns as humans. Your life patterns, the life patterns of the people that are your customers. Where are they moving? How are they feeling? Who are they interacting with? What kinds of products are they buying? What transportation means are they choosing? What is their health? What's their love life? What is their sexuality? All of those things are already being assessed. But the big internet data companies don't tell you everything they know about you because A, they have no interest in that. They don't want to scare you, they want to sell you more stuff. But they could, if they wanted to, give you a very micro-sliced profile of who you really are. So life pattern data is what this is all about. Now this is already permeating far beyond just a few internet companies. This is artificial intelligence permeating the modern enterprise. And you see here that on an industry level, we are starting to rethink institutions as artificial intelligence is getting into all kinds of processes across industries that are very efficiency driven. Lots of revolution already happening on the B2B side. This includes functions represented in this room, such as executive assistants. About a year and a half ago, a friend of mine, let's call him George, introduced me to Amy. Amy is Amelia's sister. Now, before you think this is some kind of double dating kind of thing, it was not. It was just an assistant. He introduced me to Amy, brought her into an email dialogue because Amy was supposedly really efficient at helping him schedule appointments. And I'm notoriously bad to schedule appointments with because I'm very busy and I live on airplanes. So we go around a couple of times and she finally settles on a date with me. Then I have to change it because I have to travel on short notice. And she's very patient, very responsive, and we reschedule. About 2 months later, George and I meet at a coffee shop across from campus where I teach in San Francisco, and he says, "So Olaf, how'd you like Amy?" And I said, "She's fantastic. She's very patient, never got upset with me, rescheduling so many times, right? She's really friendly too, almost too friendly to be human." And he said, "That's a good problem to have because she's not real, she's a bot." She met the Turing test from me for an assistant with whom I just have an email dialogue. Did I ever have reason to call her? No, of course not. We don't call people anymore. Right? We settled on email, and for an email dialogue, she was very organic, very responsive, seemed very human-like. Now think about this. If she is too friendly to be human, what does that say about us as humans? How many times do you have a call center call with a service rep where you get frustrated because they don't understand you? Maybe that's because you're using bad language to express yourself, and maybe that's because they're not trained well enough to really understand human psychology. Right? How many times do you go into a doctor's office and you wonder, how did this person ever decide to become a doctor? Because this shouldn't be about charts and analysis, it should be about people and talking to people, no? Even Watson AI has figured this out. They're now teaching Watson how to sound more human, more emotionally palatable. Now I ask you, what's happening here when people like Amelia are starting to eat into executive assistant territory? What happens in developed societies, much less what happens in developing societies where these types of jobs are oftentimes entry-level jobs that enable people to get in and then get upskilled, develop their own careers and livelihoods. Families depend on that. What happens to all of that? How much of TDC's value creation, I ask you, is tied to mere efficiency and economic gains as you serve corporations or as you serve consumers? Versus how much of that is geared toward actually understanding the human being and playing and empowering their purpose. How much do you know about your customer's purpose? I mean, truly, their real purpose. Well, there are, of course, indicators that you are at the center of human lives, right? Without you, Danish society might fall apart. You are the backbone of Danish society, integrating Danish society, and you say very openly, part of our mission is we bring people closer together because we make them talk to each other. We make them exchange data with each other. Now, I will tell you, I started my career 20 years ago at a company called AirTouch Communications. Some of you might remember. We got acquired by Vodafone. We said the same thing 20 years ago. Has nothing changed? That's all we do. We put phones into people's hands and we sell them minutes and we sell them data packages. I tell you, if that's the same mission 20 years from now, we have missed the whole point. And we should not be surprised when machines are taking over, because machines can do that much better in the future. You might remember that one of the last master classes taught by Stan and Sebastian already touched on this. They said, look, you have so much data on everybody. Use it to focus more on gaining a deep understanding of your consumers, your customers' lifestyles, and their routines. Now, purpose is still a bit different. It's a bit removed from that. You have to actually use analytics to figure out what's this person actually about. And then be honest about what you're seeing and being emotionally palatable and responsible and ethical about that as well, because this is a wicked problem, and I'll show you why. We need to rethink people. And I think you are predestined to be at the center of that. I talked to scholars at the University of Southern California and elsewhere that are studying the emotional relationships between computers and human beings. And they're saying already computers are starting to simulate human emotions. And that works for a short amount of time. Then the computer makes a mistake, then the human catches on to the fact that the computer, of course, doesn't have any credibility because they haven't lived your life. All of us, right? We crawled out of the primordial slime together. We understand what heartbreak is, first romance, success and failure on the job, being thrown under the bus, political nightmares at work. We get all that because we all live through it at one point or another. The machine doesn't. And it doesn't feel anything about this either. Okay? So right now we have a problem of authenticity with machines simulating human emotions. But the scholars are starting to work on this. And once we give robots sensors so they get body awareness, there may be more of an integrated emotional, intellectual intelligence dawning. People are working on this right now. In fact, some of these machines are already starting to counsel us on our emotions. Every year, about 80 million Americans have some kind of psychological trouble or another. That number has increased since the election where Mr. Trump came to power. That's not me making this up or being political, that's the actual truth. But the problem, of course, is that it's very hard to get access to the right counselor. And you have to have the right counselor that works for you with the right method, the right personality. It's a very dicey thing letting somebody in your head, isn't it? Right? It's especially dicey for soldiers in the field. Can you imagine some Air Force pilot showing up for work in the morning telling his or her colonel, I'm sorry, sir or ma'am, I can today not fly my bomber aircraft because I'm a little distraught? I'm a little off today? No, right? Soldiers are supposed to be tough. We can take it all. They don't want to seem vulnerable. They don't want to seem volatile. And they want to keep these things private. Plus, in the field in Afghanistan or Iraq, there aren't many counselors available. So the US military, jointly with the US medical establishment, have developed these kinds of psychotherapy bots. They're available on mobile phones. They can't do sophisticated analysis and tell you whether you had a trouble with your mother or your father. But they can tell you when your behavioral patterns are a little bit off, when you're feeling a bit blue. They can understand your speech patterns. They can understand whether you're perspirating. They can understand your gestures. They can understand your gait. They can do sentiment analysis. And they can say, you're talking an awful lot about killing yourself. Don't. Look at the world through a different lens. And if they can't persuade you, then they call a live counselor to talk you off jumping off a bridge. These already exist. Facebook, in fact, has done a deal with one of them. So now on Facebook, you can access a psychotherapy bot because Facebook has realized that people, after a while, don't feel better, but they feel worse being on social media. Everybody lives such beautiful lives. How come mine is so bad? Right? And so they need psychotherapy. This kind of thing, by the way, you might say, then is only for sick people. It's not for me, but that's not true. This is already now being incorporated in interviewing technologies. There are now companies that develop interview analysis bots. So if you go to your next job interview, you might be asked, can we please record this interview? And then some machine learning algorithm will comb through the data feed. It'll analyze whether you were truthful, whether you were authentic, how much you look into the camera, how confident you are. It'll analyze your facial expressions. It'll analyze your intonation. It'll then compare all of this against a set of metrics that the employer has set. It'll compare all of this against other people interviewing for the same position. And it'll compare this to people on the inside of the employer who are already on the job and doing that job very successfully. Now, by and large, that's a good thing because we want people in the right jobs. We want it for them, for their own sake. There's nothing worse than being in the wrong job. And we want it for the company because they deserve the right employee. And of course, we want it for the customer as well, right? Nothing worse than dealing with somebody who doesn't really like their job if you're a customer. And if you thought that you have complete power over your performance in an interview, you will have to think again. So again, the theme of power and empowerment. So how can TDC be more forward-leaning? I found references to well-being on your website. Is well-being the best we can do? Can we define an up-level, what well-being actually means by 2020, 2030, 2025, 2023, pick your year. But look forward, don't look back. There are companies that are starting to do this. The disruptors are coming. Some of my students, in fact, are doing this. Beacon Force is now using wearables and algorithms that analyze your heartbeat because your heartbeat is correlated with hormonal activity in your body. It can now tell employers and managers of groups of people how much employees are stimulated, whether they're being productive or whether they're checking out, whether they're depressed, and whether they're not as productive as they could be. Again, on the surface of it, a good thing. As a manager, I want to know whether Richard or Stuart or Susie are doing the best they can on a job, and how I, as a manager, can lead them more effectively, create a better work environment. That's what this is intended to do. But of course, you could also easily see that this could be abused against the employee. How are we going to govern this? Does TDC have policies in place for this? Where we want to get smarter about people? We want people to be smarter about themselves. And we want to be responsible about how we exercise this. Speak about responsible. This is being taken to a whole nother level in China. You may have heard. The social credit system. China has about 3 or 4 systems out there now where the Chinese are assessing your trustworthiness on a scale of something like 0 to 800 points. I will say up front that this was born out of some very understandable predicament. In China, they don't have a credit rating system like we do in Europe or like the Americans do. Not to say that those are perfect, but they're fundamental, they're critical for running an economy. Because you need to assess somebody's creditworthiness when they go to the bank and they apply for a loan. Only the Chinese never had that kind of system. So they woke up a couple of years ago and said, wow, how do we make Chinese society more trustworthy? Because corruption, right? Fake products, bad transactions, untrustworthy behavior was rampant. We all know that when you go into a Chinese liquor store, you don't know if you're actually getting the latest bottle of Courvoisier or whatever it is you're in there buying, or whether that is some replica made in some backyard garage. And so the Chinese government said, we have to do something about this. So now you're getting assessed, and it starts with your profile. If you are a 25-year-old mother of 2, pregnant with a 3rd, you're deemed very responsible and you will get a high entry score. If you're an 18-year-old male, single, buying a motorcycle, you are deemed to be much less trustworthy, much higher risk. Then they add on top of that all kinds of transactions that happen throughout your day, both bricks and mortar, physical transactions, and social media transactions. Chatter on social media about you. How trustworthy are you? How much are you liked or disliked? Then they assess a score of 0 to 800. If you are in the 700 to 800 range, everything is fine. You'll do really well in Chinese society. If you're 300 or lower, you are persona non grata. And in China, they really mean it. They have already kept 11 million people from taking fast trains between hubs in China. They have kept 4.4 million people from taking international flights. much less any other privilege you can think of, like tickets to concerts and things of that nature, privileges in society. And they have said, if you don't get your score up, you ain't traveling. Right? So there are real repercussions for this, and this is not just for US citizens, this is for anybody living in China. So we have to think about the power relationship. Do people have recourse? What if I fail somewhere? I disappoint somebody, but I learn from that, and I grow, and I do better. Isn't that supposed to be how life happens? Do I get extra point credit then? If somebody makes a mistake, if the machine makes a mistake in assessing me, do I have recourse? None of that has been answered. And with China's Belt and Road Initiative, you could easily see something like this being a delight for any dictator around Eurasia. Because China is building the Belt and Road Initiative through 46 countries, which represent, 65 countries, which represent 45% of global GDP. So we have to grapple with this. What is our role as TDC, as we partner with the Chinese, as we encounter the Chinese in the market? And they're coming to Europe as well. Does TDC truly see and respect the human being is the question. What do we actually actively do to tell people we are different? We are Danish, we are European, and we value the human being, the human persona, civil rights, human rights, right, and privacy. Or are we objectifying the customer? Is our main goal really just ARPU? Because if that's what it is, we're not very well equipped for the era of cognitive machines. This will become very networked in the future. In Society 5.0, we are going to be dealing with a lot of semantic spaces around a lot of things. This is a German chart, which you probably gleaned from the fact that it's quite complex. And what I want you to focus on is that blue box here in the upper half. The blue box is a semantic space around some kind of widget, some kind of product. Let's say a lamp, like the lamps in the ceiling here, that is being produced by some manufacturer. The semantic space around the lamp, right, created and stored somewhere on a server, will describe what are the production costs of the lamp, what's the pricing, what is the life cycle, is it being used well, is it not performing well, when does it have to be updated, how do we upgrade it, how do we create a better product in future. All of that, very understandable, high value for manufacturing companies. In future, this will go a step further. The lamp will recognize where it is. What's the room? What's the capacity of the room? How many people are in a room on a regular basis? What's the utilization on average? And in some countries, it'll start to assess who is in the room. What's your identity? Who is in the room with each other? There are other lamps out there. When people leave here, where are they going? That might be very useful for predicting transportation patterns, right? You could also see how that's very tricky under GDPR. Right? But these types of things are coming, and what that means is we as human beings, as we are sitting here analyzed by the lamp, are now becoming part of the value chain of the lamp. And in fact, we are some of the most valuable aspects of that lamp because the lamp is creating life pattern data on us. Right? So we are becoming part of the product. In fact, we are all part of a nervous system of data we are creating in society. A nervous system of data between our organizations, our employees, our customers, the physical environment, the weather, everything is getting measured and assessed and connected. That's a nervous system. Now you are already pretty good at creating a nervous system. You are the backbone of society when it comes to data. What role are you going to be playing in this? Are you going to be actively saying, I'm going to take that human that is sitting here assessed by the lamp, carried by my network, and I'm going to make sure that that human gets empowered in their purpose, in their lives, in their rights, every minute of the day. And that's what they'll be paying for. Who is doing this already? Anybody here seen the movie The Blob? Yeah, I'm glad some people are nodding. It dates some of us. It's a early 60s movie. Steve McQueen. Let me give you the quick plot. There's an alien on a meteorite hitting the earth, burrowing down in the woods somewhere. And there is an old man strolling through the woods, taking a walk. And of course, he's not quite with it, so he reaches in and he tries to see what this rock is all about. The alien blob slides on his arm and starts to eat up his arm, and he starts to scream, and he comes across a couple of lovers strolling through the woods, right? She runs away screaming for help. The young man tries to help the old man. She comes back with the cops. Both men have been eaten up by the blob. The blob's much bigger. Now the blob rolls over the cops, and the cop car becomes bigger and bigger. Long story short, at the end of the movie, the blob threatens. It's grown so big, it's bigger than this room, and it threatens to eat up a whole town or village. In comes the hero. Steve McQueen has figured out that the blob doesn't like the cold. So he wheels in an outsized fire extinguisher and hoses it down, and the blob freezes. And that's the end of the movie. Who is the blob? The global internet companies. They're rolling over every area of life, and we like it. I like it. I'm fully wired. I'm fully socially networked. I've got every device in the book, every smart device. A lot of value added, and they are rolling over everything, datafying everything, assessing everything. And so every area of life is being captured already. And that's not going to stop. The trends are pretty obvious. If you're looking at the top 8 companies on the left in 2007 and the top 8 companies on the right in 2017, you see the trend. Economics tends to win. And of course, you know, it's not like we don't want it to win. They enrich our lives. But think about this as human beings. Are we just economics? Are we just efficiency? Because if so, then let's not complain about the machines taking over. They're much more efficient. For instance, are we now looking at the Uberization of work? Certainly, human beings now have more access to micro jobs, small chunks of larger jobs. And we are creating a gig economy, as we say, 1099 economy. After the form in the United States, you have to fill in if you're self-employed. So we are creating more flexibility, more accessibility. Are we also, however, creating a retailerization of work? You may remember the term tailorization. This was a scholar who created the concept of packaging discrete chunks of work and then training workers on these discrete chunks and making that very replicatable, very routine, and making workers very interchangeable as assets in the industrial process. Are we now using our data capabilities, our AI capabilities, through these global platforms to retailerize work? Because if that's all we're doing, good luck to us. Sooner or later, we're going to be colliding with the machines. Uber is already facing this because there's really no reason for why there should be a human being in that car, driving the car. They're prone to accidents, they're prone to bad behavior, they're prone to getting sick, right? And therefore, why not get used to a self-driving car? Will we see massive job losses? You've seen all these hysterical statistics. This one is from The Economist that is citing an Oxford study that essentially said we all have to become love therapists and counselors or masseuses to be sustainable. We don't think that's the case. We think this will not be a far-reaching wave of layoffs, but we do think that every role that you know today is changing. McKinsey, by the way, has confirmed this. They're saying 30 to 40% of everybody in this room will have a different job profile by 2025. Think about 40% of your job changing between now and then. How much of that can you stomach? What kind of training do you need? Or maybe you can't be retrained, and what happens then? What's your future defensibility? The job of a banker. Think about the job of a banker. What's the job of a banker? It's to create a transaction environment. It's to create trust, security, and it's to create relationships. Transaction environment, security and trust, blockchain and artificial intelligence can already do. What's left is the relationship. Do most bankers go into banking to create relationships, or because they're quantitative people? Big questions for bankers. Lots of fields are being impacted. This is Japan. Japan has a problem. They have about a shortage of about 1 million caregivers for human beings, particularly the elderly, by 2025, and they're not making enough babies. And they're also not liking immigration. So if you don't like immigration, you're not making babies, what's left but robots? So they're creating robots. And they're the only country in the world that is not afraid of humanoid robots. Yes, they want humanoid robots. You've probably seen Sophia, who got citizenship in Saudi Arabia. Yeah, that was a nice PR stint. But you know, it is synonymous for the fact that the Japanese are really not afraid. They're already limiting corner store hours because they can't get any more people to staff sales desks. So they're automating the sales process. By the way, if you're looking at the lower left-hand corner here, these plush seals, highly successful in therapeutic applications in hospitals and elder care homes. And you might say, well, look, this is clearly a plush animal. This doesn't look like a real seal. It couldn't be perceived as real. But that's not the point. The point is good enough. The elderly and the kids that have been tested with this are saying, look, we know it's not real, but it's the next best thing. I'm not getting any visitors because nobody in the family cares about me being an elder home. I don't have caretakers because there aren't anymore. I can't have a pet in this elderly home, so I'm trying this. And the seal will actually talk in different ways and erect its body in different ways and follow you with its gaze around the room. It'll be sort of like the real thing, but not quite. And they're saying, I'm suspending my disbelief. That's like you paying $15, euros, what is that in krona, to go to the movies and be taken off on some escapist adventure. And you know it's not real, but you're paying to be misled. You're paying for the privilege. That's like a child believing in the Easter Bunny or in Santa Claus, knowing it's not real, but willingly engaging, suspending disbelief. That's what these people are doing. Remember, most of disruption is not the perfect stuff. It's the stuff that's good enough, brought to you at scale. And that's what is happening with that. Another Japanese example, these don't mind being upgraded on a daily basis with new software. This is the Henna Hotel in Japan, where 70% of costs got reduced through the use of robots. No human being works there. This is obviously not suitable for the Ritz-Carlton, where you expect high touch, but it is suitable for a small business hotel that is serving traveling salespeople. They want in and out quickly and cheaply. And so they don't want human beings because they're not as efficient, not as quick as robots. And these are pretty template routine processes. Now again, what happens to entry-level jobs? What happens to immigrants in this country, maybe unskilled, who can't get entry-level jobs because robots are taking over? So we have to become much better focusing at what human beings are actually good at and then empowering that with our business model. So take a look at the left side of this. What are we really good at? And this came out of about these 100 interviews for the book that I mentioned. Being self-conscious. It's an English-American term that means being conscious of self. But of course it has a bad connotation. Self-conscious means I'm insecure about the social environment I'm in and how I'm being perceived, right? So it has a negative meaning. But it's actually a high form of intelligence because it means you are able to reflect on yourself in a social setting in such a way that is very humble and self-critical. Many people lack that skill. Of course, that skill taken too far will inhibit your productivity and your ability to socially relate because you become too timid. But the ability, the core ability, is a form of intelligence. Ideation, machines can't do ideation. Conceptualization. Conceptualization and theory development, as well as imagination, are things that the human brain can do, and we have currently very few ideas as to how that actually happens physiologically, neurologically in the brain. As part of the book, we interviewed my friend Patrick Wolf, who is a US chess grandmaster, played Kasparov and others. He's at the top of his game. And he said, look, we knew when we got beaten by a machine in chess that this was the end. This was the end of humans outperforming machines in chess. Chess, you know, frankly, is a strategic game, but it's fairly routine. And he says, after, 25 years of being a grandmaster, there isn't really a constellation of moves I haven't seen. So he's not surprised that the machine, on average, will beat him. But he says what the machine can't do, and this is important, is to see an image on the board. This is what the chess pieces look like. There is a picture, there is an image, there's a landscape that he sees. And then he says, then I see an image the way I want it. I'm constructing victory over here. And then I'm developing a theory on how I get from picture A to picture B. The machine doesn't do that. All the machine can do is very rapidly, at much higher processing power, calculate all the possible permutations of moves and come out with the best ones, and then hope that you won't get it. And it's winning because we are competing on the ground of effective processing power. He is saying the best and highest form of chess today is being played by chess grandmasters collaborating with artificial intelligence, machine and human, playing together. He says it's like watching gods play chess. And he says, I'm in awe when I see that happening. So think about symbiosis between these human traits and the machine traits. There are a number more here. Transposing learning from one area to another, the machine can't yet do. Choosing which game to play. Can a computer choose whether to play chess or Go? It can beat you at either, but it's pretty narrow purpose dedicated to one game. It can't choose between 100 games, which is the best to play with you. One day it might. Manual dexterity, I will highlight here for you because we should never discount the human body and especially the human hands as part of human intelligence. The body is an integral part of our intelligence for the same reasons that I just outlined. The primordial slime is a very physical experience. We evolved with our bodies and they're part of our intelligence. Robots can't get there yet. That experience, that physical experience is very unique. There are areas in our brain, 70% of which are dedicated to working with our hands, right? We just talked over the break about Lego, right, Jonas? Why is it that Lego is still working for us today in this increasingly virtual and digital world? Well, because people, and especially kids, love playing with their hands with physical things, right? If we let them. So what new TDC services could enable that new hybrid human-machine interaction that is pegged to human purpose? How can TDC ensure that the machine always understands us and facilitates that? There are some experiments already being done. The Germans here, pictured here, are, there is a German machine company called Groth, which many of you might know. They're collaborating with Google, with BMW and others as part of the DFKI, the German Research Institute for Artificial Intelligence. And they're developing manufacturing alleys, as they call them, that have machines that understand the human operator. It can sense the human operator, the physical and psychometric parameters. How high are you? What language do you speak? Maybe things like, are you stressed out? How digital are you? And it adjusts the parameters of the machine to the human operator for better joint productivity. Similar experiments in America have yielded the insight that if we feed variables into machine learning algorithms that are incorporated in production machinery, that include the human need. So job security. I need to work a certain amount of hours on a machine per week to sustain my family. Flexibility at work. I don't want to work on, Friday afternoons because my daughter has a soccer game, whatever it may be. Right? And I need to have a certain income level. All of these parameters and a lot more, if you feed that into the production algorithm of the machine, it and the operator can have a much more fruitful, productive, and more fulfilling relationship. That's already been proven. So we need to take all that in, understand that human power must be maintained, and that doesn't happen by itself. That doesn't happen by itself, because economics always wins. I teach economics. We need to get in there, and we need to make sure that the human power and the human purpose gets maintained and empowered and upheld. So how do we then reinforce the human position in this ecosystem? We need to take a look forward. We can't look back. Things are changing too fast. So look forward and assess all the disruption trends that are driving this. And this is something you can do in a room. This is something you can do with yourself. It's better done in a team, better done in a room like this with a lot of diversity. Ask yourself, what are all the trends impacting, for instance, the future of work, which is so important to our human purpose? And you'll see a lot of things that are very commonplace. And then you'll see some things like spirituality, for instance, that you may not have readily expected. But all of that is, in fact, driving how the future of work is turning out. We have talked to spiritual leaders as part of our book that have a very discrete opinion on what the human role is in work and in family and in society, because that's what they do for a living. They care about the human on the spiritual side. So take some minutes on your own, not here, but we do this in rooms of corporate executives all the time. Ask yourself, if I were forced to come up with, 80 of these driving forces for the future of work or for the future of purpose in human beings and society 5.0, what are the drivers? Make yourself think critically about that. Take stock of economics and efficiency, but also ask yourself, but what life do we want to live and what's driving that in 2030? It's usually a very thought-provoking exercise if you ask yourself, is there anything that surprised me? Was I able to go beyond the obvious? Because that's where the nuggets of insight are. Where do we, as executives, as TDC, hook in which ones of these trends and drivers to make it work for our customers and for us? What is the human role? What is the customer's role in Society 5.0? There's different futures that could arise, symbolized by these 4 quadrants. And the role of the human and human power and purpose is very different in each one of them. We have a choice. The upper left might be one where we are completely displaced. Remember, Hawking and Musk? I think that was actually the upper right. Do we want that upper right? Well, if we don't want that upper right, we got to do something about it. Nobody else is going to do it for us. Who are we waiting for? Governments? It's not going to happen. Right? So we, as executives, have to get on top of this. We want the lower right, remember? What is the value chain with the human in it in society? Is the next question in this future that we want. In 2025, how will TDC's value chain represent that human, fully empowered, and of course paying us for that empowerment? How is that different from how the Chinese internet companies are playing this today? And I do think there is a discrete European model, but we haven't really shaped it yet. We haven't defined it yet. We have to. We can't just wait for the Chinese and the Americans to do that for us and then complain about it later. Once we know what that is, we can craft action paths into the future we want. Lower right-hand corner. The orange circle here is a moonshot. Right? Jaap will probably look at Jonas to define that moonshot or be part of that moonshot. What is that moonshot going to be? What's the big idea for TDC to empower the human in that lower right-hand corner future? And how do we build capabilities into it, symbolized by the blue circles? We can determine our own destiny. We can determine our own future. That's not taken out of our hands. Of course, as we do that, we're going to have to change persona. TDC is already in a pivotal moment with the split up. Now is the time to define who you want to be. What is your culture? What's your persona? How do you support human beings out there? Why wouldn't we read a case study about TDC 10 years from now showing us the alternative to the Chinese model? Well, many of you will say, well, we got to hire more digital talent, that's for sure. And yes, you do. And that's difficult because digital talent wants to work for social media companies. They want to go to Silicon Valley. They want to go to Berlin. They want to go to London. They want to go to really cool and exciting cities. And they're asking for a lot of money. And they're different. I have students, top-notch students, who were dying to get jobs at Google. And they lasted about a year. Not because they were not good. They were fantastic. They were so good, they were getting bored at Google. If they're getting bored at Google, what happens to the rest of us? Right? So they want entrepreneurial challenges. They want rapid self-actualization and development and growth. They want change in their lives. That's going to be disruptive. Now, we can sit here and we can say, how do we please them? And we do need to. because we need them, right? And they need us. Society needs us to make that happen. But as we do that, we have to ask ourselves, which parts of their culture do we want, and which parts do we need to change? So the regular agitator, digital entrepreneur, startup entrepreneur that we want to hit that moonshot for us and with us will have very little respect for the fact that you are multiple decades old. I had one of them tell me recently that, in fact, a friend of mine who worked at a German automotive company, and he said, you know, there's a reason for why it has taken us 100 years to build a car like this one. And he pointed to one. I won't tell you which it is. And he said, it takes a lot to put this together and make it safe for people. And then somebody like Elon Musk, as crazy as he is, shows up and he says, well, it's taken you 100 years, I'm going to do it in 10. And he may not do it in 10, he may do it in 15, or maybe he won't do it at all and he'll crater and go bust. But in the process, he has lit a fire under our behinds, right? Now, we want that fire because it means change, and usually change for the better. But what we're also seeing with the Silicon Valley crowd is that they haven't yet understood human purpose and the ethics and responsibility that goes with it. I believe you do, because you are the backbone, the thing that holds Danish society together. I think you have a shot at bringing that to the table. Pair it with the agility. Pair it with this mentality of throwing it at the wall, seeing if it sticks. But it needs to be a deliberative act of figuring out what your culture is going to be, what your organizational persona is going to be. Because their mentality is change is always good, just not for everybody. Okay, that means if you're not with them, you're against them. Right? We can understand the revolutionary mindset, but we also know what it means to leave communities behind. And you are really good at not leaving communities behind. Bring that to the table. Think about your values. Bring your values to this new era. Think beyond economics. Make that human-machine interaction a true symbiosis. Don't have the human collide and compete with the machine head-on. Don't train people to do linear analysis all day long when you know the machine can do that much more effectively altogether, because you're setting them up for unemployment. That is not what is needed for human defensibility. And think about what corporation you want to become. We call it the Cambrian corporation. Why Cambrian? Because in the Cambrian era, in human geology, we had an explosion of life. We believe, personally, being net positive on this new cognitive era, that there could be an explosion of life, of opportunity for human beings. But not if we don't do anything about it. We have to shape it, we have to frame it. So think about how your organization can now redefine itself to take a lead in human-machine symbiosis. What values will guide that? And how will you shape Society 5.0? That, to me, is the highest strategic question for you. So, with that said, remember, values are important. Look at the lens of values, look through it and see power, see position of the human being, and see the persona of your organization. How will you empower humans in Society 5.0? Thank you very much. I believe Jonas is going to join me for a discussion. Yes?
Yes.
Great.
All right. Hi, everyone. I thank you for the introduction, Jaap. Yes, exciting to hear this. I think from my perspective and what I do in my daily work, I think I have like 500 questions. But for our purpose, of course, I also have some where we take it up in a more general position, being in TDC as an employee, being part of strategizing for TDC, as well as in the role, thinking ahead in terms of technology. So I look very much forward to have this discussion. Where should we start, Olaf?
Well, it's a big question. I mean, obviously, you have a tremendous opportunity now that you're in the middle of change already to redefine yourself.
Yeah.
And I think, the question that we batted around outside about, who are we going to be in 30 years from now, and what kind of talent do we need is a good place to start.
Yes.
And so, you asked me the question out there, and I think, part of the answer is we have to train people to take creative approaches to other human beings, solving problems in human lives.
Yes.
This old image of a marketing analyst slicing and dicing data is probably outdated already. So we have to go to, what do you do with that data? How do you train people to be critical, not just analytically critical, but socially critical on the data that you're getting?
Yeah.
How do I pair that with my understanding of individual customers? And then how do I deliver, purpose-bound services to those customers?
Yes.
By the way, I believe that as millennials are starting to become the biggest consumer base in history and already are becoming that you will see great receptivity on their part to this, because they want to be seen as people, not just as ARPU objects.
Yes. And going back a little bit into, I think we talk a lot about technology, we talk a lot about AI. We just heard and we got some glimpse into what scenarios we have in the future. How fast will these changes come?
Yeah, another great question. The thing is, we always overhype things. So we believe that machines are taking over the world much faster than they probably will, and that's been sort of a proven pattern with all of us who are so eager to get technology innovation at scale. So things tend to unfold slower in the beginning. You've probably seen the Gartner hype cycle. The curves about how different technologies go up on the curve in terms of public attention, and when they peak and then they come back down the other side, and then they come back up again, and then they even out and they become scaled. And so oftentimes what you see is technologies going up on the curve and then sliding back down, because people get disappointed that that we can't scale fast enough. So virtual reality is a great example. Location-based services, right? I mean, that's been touted for 20 years.
Yeah.
And of course, it's coming, and it's here now. So I think we probably overestimate how quick things will happen in the beginning, and then once we settle into the fact that they take longer, then things accelerate, and we see the opposite phenomenon, which is that we are surprised by the speed of that.
Yeah.
Right. So it's my hunch is by 2030 we will see symbiotic relationships where we accept machines as advisors that are highly capable. The Japanese are already there because they don't have the same European type of European American understanding of the world, which is shaped by Christianity and our belief system that the human being is at the top of the pyramid, and then there's everything else. To them, other life forms, like whether it's animals or whether it's smart machines, are all part of an ecosystem, and we're equal parts. And so we need to take them seriously.
All right, and then I also think that if we take this into our our then organizational perspective, you mentioned marketing tasks, but in the Japanese example, you see that it's more it's service-related fields like taking care of the elderly. It's SEALs in these tasks. But now you're also talking marketing, which is a bit of a different type of service delivered and more in the academic space. What's your perspectives there?
I think the key ingredient to both of those is whether the activity in your brain is linear and involves calculations.
Yeah.
Very routine steps that are templated, that can be readily replicated. Some of us might be doing those at greater accuracy and greater speed than others. None of us can compete with machines on those.
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably the better lens than job profiles to look at what's changing.
Yeah.
So take a more task-based analytical view. How many, what's the percentage of routine analytical or mechanical tasks in your everyday life that you're being compensated on, that you might actually enjoy, but that are replaceable by machines, right? Incidentally, things look a little different in manufacturing because their human dexterity, as they say, another fancy word for being, agile with your brain and your hands, is prized still a bit more than the pure analytical brain activity, right? So being able to work with your hands is defensible because very few robots manage to have that kind of manual dexterity connected to a highly evolved brain. I have a colleague at Berkeley who says, he's a computer scientist and very well known, and he says, look, it's taken us 30 years to teach robots to grab a simple bottle, a glass of water. And, having a robot touch a bottle of water with the same dexterity as this clicker or shaking somebody's hand and knowing instinctively what's the right way to grab is something that machines still can't do and won't be able to do for quite a while.
Yeah. And then working with that, I also, and I'm sure a lot of people also think, how far are we going to go with this? Can we go and should we go in these 12 years with AI? I've heard notions, read books, super intelligence, for example, brain emulation, where you simulate the brain so you kind of get the same type of neuron work. Where are we going? Where are we going with this?
So two things on that. The notion of a superintelligence, I think, is attractive from an entertainment point of view. And different people have written about this and are selling a lot of books. Not that I'm envious or anything, talking about it. But when you ask scientists about that horizon, they will tell you, look, honestly, it's taken us, 60 years to get to the current state of artificial intelligence. And there have been ups and downs, or as they say, summers and winters in artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
And, we're probably going to see a couple of more cycles. So they're assuming it's going to take 50 to 70 years at the very least to get to a superintelligence. So I think, it's great to think about, and I think there's room for that. But I think if we just talk about that, we miss the greater point, which is between here and there, there's a lot of change that's happening. And that change will happen even if we never get to a superintelligence. So we need to take a look at how machines are changing our decisions, our agency, our life patterns, our humanity, and how we deal with each other, right?
Yeah.
To me, that's significant.
Yeah.
Right.
So what you're looking at is not this generalized intelligence that we, or the intrinsic values that you project as human, but more AI as a support interaction mechanism.
Yeah, I see it as a valuable, increasingly smart partner.
Yeah.
And as with every partnership, we need to realize, right? Marriage is like that too. You need to realize different partners are good at different things.
Yeah.
And the machine will become much better than we are at many things in our lives. They're all narrow. They're all narrow slices of something. But taken together, they're very valuable and potentially make our lives much easier and much more enjoyable. So I look at it as an almost equal partner. But in every partnership, you need to have respect and you need to have boundaries. And we need to establish some boundaries and not just let it happen.
Yeah.
But, and harking back to your earlier question, I believe this can't be stopped. I don't think it should be stopped. I will also tell you that I would welcome, conversations afterwards. I don't think ever in human society have we fully stopped any technology thrust, including nuclear power. Different countries will give it up. Germany is a good example, and now, there is more coal. Great. Fantastic. That was a smart decision, and more dependence on Russia. Another great outcome.
Yeah.
Right? So yes, different countries will, but globally, no. China is building a nuclear power station a month. So nuclear power, we haven't stopped that. Have we stopped any kind of war machinery from being built, even though we had lots of experience, whether that's in Asia or whether that's, World War I and II, tremendous atrocities? No, we've never stopped much of anything. GMOs, Europe is dragging their heels, but the rest of the world says, no, we're going to continue. Right? What about CRISPR, gene editing? Are we going to stop that? I don't think we're going to stop that. I think different countries will go at different paces, but the world is not stopping it. And the world, even though we have a lot of rhetoric about nationalism and receding or pausing globalization, I don't think that we can stop the flow of data, the flow of technology, the flow of people across borders. So the stuff will come, and we got to be ready.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's maybe also where you touch a lot upon purpose. I also think I agree, but I think then also purpose can be defined in so many ways. What's the purpose for TDC? What's the purpose, for customers? TDC serving customers' purpose. What's the purpose of us as employees? I think from a TDC perspective, at least my thoughts are very much into and our role in society to also guide society in the right way, to use these types of technologies in the right way, specify rules around what should be used, what types of data should be used for what purposes, and also actually explaining with the capabilities that we have and will have, what will be feasible, and is that serving the right purpose, both for society, for TDC, for customers, for people. I think that's where we have a large role. We are a technology company. We have tremendous amounts of data already. We are seeing this curve, right? Just look at our consumption of data in the network. We are seeing this forehand. We are a big organization, in at least in Danish, Nordic, Northern European terms. So this is something that we have been working with for quite some time. And I think you are just stressing the fact that we also need to take our stance much clearer, perhaps also on a societal level. I'm also curious in terms of the fact that purpose has also this of people and consumers, perhaps, so employees, we can take that afterwards, but people and purpose. Now, we know that people want to be entertained. That stimulates our creativity. It makes us relax. It has a lot of benefits in that sense. But we also want, as people, to hand over much of the more, what we would state, maybe a little bit boring activities like driving a car. I don't like to drive on the highway myself. It's so boring. I have parents at Lolland. It's 1.5 hour of boredom because there aren't that many cars. So I just drive straight ahead. I'm perfectly fine with an AI doing that driving for me, for example. Mm-hmm. So it's also something about I could spend my time better. I could see a movie, hear some great music, could fill back some memories. I could think about combining stuff in work, So there's also a demand in society for these things. Sometimes, what if the demand from us goes beyond what is sensible for a corporation to do?
I think the key in all this, though, is that the way automation is happening today, so take some discrete examples that you mentioned. The entertainment. Entertainment can be regarded as two things. It can be regarded as candy, right, sweets, just sort of satisfaction in the moment. Mm. It can also be a fantastic mechanism for learning and self-development. Mm. And you can learn while playing a game without ever knowing that you're learning. Right? Yeah. We always associate learning with, it's got to be hard, it's got to be tough, it's got to feel painful. But it doesn't. Kids learn by playing. Why have we unlearned to learn like that? We have we have sort of adopted this paradigm that learning has to be very hard work. What if we could say, okay, we have applications as an opco that will understand how each one of us learn best and in the most fun way, and will let us learn while playing. But there are differences between people, right? And then there are different in terms of how they learn. And then there are differences in terms of how you need to modulate their way of learning so they grow, right? And all of that is very individualized. Yeah. The second example is that you might well appreciate getting the autopilot to take over on your hour-and-a-half long drive, because there aren't many cars on the road. There could be somebody who, statistically fits your mold, but has a few tweaks to his or her personality that say, look, in that hour and a half, I really want to have hands on the wheel and drive my car hard and have some fun and for some sporty driving, right? The machine needs to understand that individual difference. Right now, the machine is taking both of you and is correlating you based on what it knows. And to the machine, you look very similar, because the machine doesn't know that maybe your counterpart, your partner there, has had a certain type of day, and his or her emotional composition on that day is different than yours. You might be tired from an executive presentation and you want to have hands off, and they may have had an easy day and want to have hands on. The machine doesn't know that yet. It only knows raw statistical data about you, right? So we got to get to a point where the machine understands those differences, just as it does with the educational applications, right? So very individualized rather than just statistical.
Yeah, I agree. But I also have to challenge a little. What if when I was driving the car that suddenly there is some kind of rope work and everybody has to file in on one line?
Yeah.
Do you know what happens? We are not ants, right? So there's a lot of human autonomy because somebody likes to drive and come first, others wait and are polite and follow the rules. Whereas if you look at like ants, they are simply so good at doing those tasks.
Yeah. It's a great example that, in fact, there's a wonderful young woman, a scholar at Berkeley, that is working on exactly that problem. Because what they have seen in autonomous cars is that the very sort of mechanistic way of the car observing traffic and then waiting for certain parameters to fit. So if it wants to switch lanes, it observes what's happening in the lane over, and then it says there's got to be at least whatever it is, 50 meters of a free space for me to actually change lanes. And then what happens is, if you talk to the average BMW owner who's had that experience, car companies take a very conservative approach because they don't want to kill people, and that's much appreciated. But what then happens is that the autopilot will keep going slower and slower and slower and waiting for that gap. And the human being gets upset because they're impatient, and that's not how human life happens. How an actual hands-on-the-wheel driver makes that happen is they nudge over, right? There may be somebody that's much less than 50 meters away, but you think you can get away with it. You might make eye contact. You might nudge in a bit into the lane. You see how they react. None of that is necessarily a conscious process for you because it happens very fast, split seconds. But you gather that data, and you then make decisions in split seconds about whether to nudge some more, or be more assertive, or to pull back. And the autopilot currently doesn't do that. So she's working on exactly that problem. How do you make the autopilot more human? To gather that insight on split-second increments to nudge in, right? So,
but I'm maybe also thinking that this interaction between this human and the machine, right? That it will be much more in a symbiotic kind of way, because sometimes it would perhaps be better to leave some trust that it will find it's doing it for a purpose, to keep you safe and keep others safe and faster, because we can mix, they will drive like an ant farm or something.
Yeah.
So in some degree, to find that balance, I think that's also something for all of us, myself as well, that when we embed these types of technologies, that this trust, mutual trust perhaps, is also key. that once an algorithm helps you, or sometimes takes a decision, you will also have to trust it in a much faster way, because some of the activities that you're doing today, I'm doing today, that we actually can automate, it will happen so fast that then, you will also have to adapt to, okay, wow, receive the input in a second, and then go on your tasks. You won't have that space between your tasks.
Mm-hmm. John Kao.
In the same way.
Yeah, John Kao, whom some of you may know, The Economist magazine called him the godfather of creativity, came in and spoke in one of my courses recently and said he's got a Tesla with an autopilot. And he has not yet developed this trust that you speak about, because he sees the car, when it's in autopilot mode, behaving very differently than he would. And some of that is very healthy, because maybe it's a bit more careful than he is. But some of that, he says, are minor things that are unnerving to him and make him want to take control. Like, where in the lane the car positions itself is different from how he would position the car if he were driving. And so what he's really waiting for is for an autopilot that can understand his behavior and nudge a bit more to how he would position in the lane, and create more of a rapport between the car autopilot and himself, emulating his behavior while keeping him safe. And that's really what many emotion scholars who are studying this interface, emotional interface between computers and humans, are working on now. Yeah. Because that trust is really a prominent problem.
Yeah. And then taking that into a TDC context with the purpose of with employees. How should we address that potential coming issue as well from an employee perspective?
I think there is something inherently European here that some of us on the other side of the Atlantic wish we had more of, and that is a commitment to the human being long term, as more than a production asset. And I think that needs to come out clearly on the part of TDC. We know disruption is coming. We know some jobs are going to go away. We know most jobs are going to have some level of significant disruption, right? And so there needs to be a commitment to people to say, look, it's coming, but we have a little bit of time. Let's jointly work on better jobs, training programs, upskilling programs, and make that commitment now.
Yep.
The problem for most organizations, and that's probably not so different on this side of the Atlantic than it is on the other, is that corporations, by and large, are not incentivized to think about the future of jobs now, ahead of time. Very preoccupied, obviously, with current business, with quarterly results, with annual results. We're looking at a transition of maybe 5 years to 10 years out. So which HR department currently is working on the future of jobs for their company? So I would say there's a challenge here. Commit to the person, but do so now, and institute some upskilling programs. I think that is something we need to start now.
Yeah. I also, yesterday, I had talks with Copenhagen Business School and their deacon of education. And he told me that Jaap will receive a questionnaire very soon, where he and others will be asked what future capabilities should an institution like CBS focus in on, research-wise as well, in the next 30 years. Because as he told me, bringing in professors is a very long-term commitment for a university, both attracting the right ones, but also, it states that you commit to a certain area of research. So that will come very soon. They're doing a very large research with all the large corporations in Denmark. So a big question to you, Olaf. What should Jaap answer?
It's probably the highest value question from a talent development angle that there is. The quick answer is we need to create data literacy very quickly. And I'm talking about data science. Understanding what the data says, how good is the data, how bad is the data, is it loaded up with biases and judgments that are not statistically representative of who the customer is or who the employee base is. That kind of critical data literacy is currently lagging. So that's very clear. That's different from teaching people how to code, right? And that's often sort of mistakenly used as the same thing, and it's not. Teaching people how to code could be an interesting experience because they start to understand how machines work. But coders themselves, basic coding, will go away because machines can do that much better. The ability to critically reflect in a social context on the data is a very different thing. So everybody across the corporation should be data literate and data critical. And then I would say there's got to be a program that emphasizes some of these capabilities that I've shown in the slide, that are innately human capabilities that the machine doesn't possess yet. And you know, for many of us that might seem like, well, but I'm human, I'm already good at this stuff, but that's not right. Remember the example of, you know, Amy being almost too friendly to be human, right? We sometimes take a misstep, and we sometimes are less than emotionally intelligent. Training up on that can only be strategically helpful for our own sustainability. So those skills. You know, I'm a business school professor, and I have to tell you that I think, by and large, our industry, the business school industry, has failed to educate people in this way. Look, I mean, it was founded as an industry to crank out investment bankers and strategy consultants. Modern operating companies need people that know people well, not just numbers and slideware. And so we have to start changing that paradigm. We have to be able to lead other people, motivate other people, create imagination, inspiration in other people. It is amazing what happens when you have a good leader. And, you know, frankly, most people in leadership roles are not optimum leaders. But it's amazing what happens when a leader can really inspire people, no matter what their qualifications are. And so I think that is, you know, that human element of it is something that we need to emphasize much more, combined with that data science literacy, right?
So the drivers being, yes, data science, leadership, combined with, where are we in anthropologists, or?
I always say to my students, learn to be business anthropologists. Understand the person. Don't switch off the analytical brain. Don't switch off the business fundamentals, obviously. That's got to be there in the background. But be an anthropologist. Understand the human. I mean, as I said at the start of the talk, we are here to create better lives in society for humans. There's no better way than business to do that. But that's really the end-all be-all. So why have we unlearned to focus on the human? I don't really understand that. You know, the other thing is, we are so used to looking at historical data. And I think now with machines becoming much better at that, take those insights and then project forward and say, you know, exercise foresight. If I place this device into this family, what's going to happen? People who have Alexa, how many here have Alexa at home? Alexa devices. I see maybe a handful of hands up. If this was a room in America, you'd probably get half of everybody raising their hands. And I think a good portion of those people would tell you that their family dynamics have changed because of Alexa being in the house. Why are we not trying to... What is that?
Can you elaborate on that?
So you know, I will tell you that Alexa is in our kitchen, and she is the go-to person now for advice. I mean, for quick advice. And note how I'm talking about her as the person. My daughter came to me recently. She's 12, and she, you know, sometimes we ask her to, quote unquote, babysit the 9-year-old. And she said, you know, it'd be fantastic if Alexa could actually have a conversation with me while you guys are gone. Because, you know, we'd love to just talk to her. of course, to somebody like my wife, that her neck hair stands up when she hears that, because that's a computer device simulating to be a human being, right? But that's the young generation wants these devices. Once they start talking, then why not have them be smart talkers, right? Or as a colleague of mine said, I'm not afraid of artificial intelligence, I'm afraid of artificial stupidity. And that means, a dumb device talking to me, it's much worse than a smart device talking to me.
Yeah.
And so this thing will start to take on a personality, right?
Yeah.
Not a human personality, but a sort of something in between. And we're having to get used to that. And so the dynamics change, right? The dynamics of interaction. We need to understand that, right? And as business people.
Yeah.
And develop products and services that address that. Help it, modulate it, shape it.
And fast.
And fast, because that's already here. I mean, Alexa's now getting into cars.
Yeah.
And, and the young generations grow up with this, and we need to do this now. We can't wait another 5 years.
Yeah,
right?
because what I also sense from your presentation is that there is a lot of technology available already. And it is going fast now. Speed of change, I think in the consumer products like Google Assistant, Alexa, it's just pouring into the market. Uber with their very nice taxi services and so on. With a background like TDC, where we still not have a complete stream of data that we can just hook up to develop all these new services. Where should we start? That's the $5 million, maybe higher, Jaap, question.
The start to me is more is not always more. I think sometimes less is more. Mm-hmm. And what we're seeing in this digital world is that people are not becoming happier, they're becoming unhappier. And I think we as digital service providers need to take note of that and say, that can't be our purpose. That cannot be our goal, to create a society that is mentally ill. And so, and some of the internet companies are now starting to grapple with this. So I get back to understanding the human being. I remember when I was a youngster in Germany, there was a TV show called Löwenzahn, which is the name of a flower, right? And the narrator it was a wonderful kids show. At the end of the show, he'd say, and now, dear youngsters, it's time to switch off the TV. Get out and play. Don't keep watching TV. We don't do that, right? On social media, we tell people, no, please get addicted. We hire psychologists that can tell you how to get you addicted, right? Instead of saying, you know what, we sense you are unhappy. Switch off. Get off the damn phone. Get off the damn screen. Get out into nature. Come back and do more work. You'll be much happier. And then maybe people will start paying you because they're happier. But more and more and more of a good thing, it turns into a bad thing. And I think that's particularly true for digital, which is getting into our heads really fast.
Yeah.
So focusing on the right balance and getting paid for bringing happiness and fulfillment and purpose to people rather than just more content, more consumption, I think that is a good place to start.
So relevance. Yeah.
Relevance, and frankly, I mean, there is something to be said for health, right? And for you have it on your website, wellness.
Yeah.
Right?
Well-being.
Well-being, right? Yes.
Yeah. And the context then.
The context,
Relevance,
being aware of the context.
Context.
Yes.
Yes, in a broader sense. I also think we should take a couple of questions.
Yes, I'd be happy to.
Yeah.
All right, we'll start with some questions that have come in by SMS, and I'd like to try and take some of these and group them and may do a sort of a 3-for-1 here. I'd like to follow up on the future of work. First, from our own organization's perspective, we're looking into massive changes in terms of the future work. You mentioned 40% of our jobs will be changing very soon. How do we facilitate the ability to change among our own employees? How do we help them see this as an opportunity? And then from a societal perspective, the future of work. The Nordic societies are very egalitarian. How do we ensure this going forward? Do we need a tax on robots? Do we need universal basic income? And then finally, following up on purpose for an organization such as ours, where do you see areas for developing our purpose going forward in terms of empowerment? Where does the future or the possibility in terms of empowerment for a company such as ours lie?
Okay, that's a handful. So I would say on change management inside the company, I think we do need to assess in collaboration with each employee how much of your daily work is really routine in the true sense, because sometimes there is the illusion of routine, but there is real human judgment in the routine. But how much of this is routine in a way that could be displaced by a machine over the next 5 years? As you do that, however, you need to create a vision for people, right? So the worst thing that you can possibly do, whether that's as an executive or as a politician, is to tell people, we're going to analyze you and we're going to tell you how much you're going to be disrupted. And then in their minds, they're extrapolating from there and they're saying, yeah, and the next thing is you're going to start to tell me, I get a severance package and I'm out of here. If they don't have information from you as to where this is going, they will assume the worst. And every human being does the same thing, and that's very understandable. So as you analyze this, you have to give people a vision. Look, here is the vision of a TDC that we want to create. Best place to work, human fulfillment, super productive. What does that mean in the telecom context of 2025? And we collectively as an employee base want to make that happen. So we are committing to you as an employee to help lead you through this change. Here is the vision. The vision will change, the vision will morph, nothing ever stays the same, okay? But here's a commitment to a basic vision that we will jointly alter as we walk together. Then you analyze and then you say, okay, 20% of your job will go away, 40% will go away, 50% will go away. Let's do an honest assessment of what you are really good at. And a lot of people have a lot of illusions about what they're good at. And some of those illusions are, you are cheating yourself because you're thinking, you think you should be good at something. You've always been trained. That's how you look at yourself, but you're really not, right? And some of these illusions are based on, I'm not like that, but I want to be like that. And if you have the innate capabilities, then we should support that. And if you're just cheating yourself, then we should find a way to tell you that's not who you are. And we can't get you there over the next 5 years either. But let's still make sure that you are fulfilled and that you do what you do best and what you want to do. Okay? And so the vision has to be paired with an individual growth program and a commitment, right? There is pain for both sides. But at the end, there is a vision. We're so afraid. I say this to politicians as well. Politicians are so afraid of these visions because they become attackable. Right? German Chancellor Schmidt was supposed to have said, if you have visions, you should go see a doctor. Right? I mean, it's horrible. In this age of digital disruption, we fail to have a vision for what a modern digitized society looks like. Right? So vision and then individual growth, commitment, and training programs. The second question, can you repeat that, please? The second part of that?
Yeah. So from a societal perspective, what does the future of work mean in terms of loss of jobs? How do we ensure a high level of egalitarianism, tax on robots, universal basic income?
Yes.
What's the answer?
So I think we're currently working on this at UC Berkeley. What is the future of what we call working, learning, earning? Because that's the complex. And in our society currently, we're assuming that you get paid, you earn based on working. Could we disentangle that, unpack that, and say, no, you'll earn, and you'll do work, but it's not direct compensation for, checking into an office every day. What people care about most is meaning, right? The purpose derived from working. Mastery, getting really good at something, and the social contact at work, which is often underestimated. The one thing that when people retire that they tell you most often is, I really miss the social context. Being in meetings, essentially, right? So those three things. Now, do they have to be tied to a certain type of output at a certain type of company? Or could we say, look, if you decide that you want to take care of your elderly parents, or of your kids, or you want to start a nonprofit, or whatever it is, and there'll be output metrics, but we'll pay you for that activity wherever that is as a society. That's usually what UBI, Universal Basic Income, is pegged to, right? UBI, it's too early to judge. We're experimenting right now. There are people who are saying, there's too much of a risk of people slacking off, sitting on the couch, playing video games and drinking, right? Then there's others who say, look, that's frankly a minor portion. Most people will use that freedom to actually do something they really always wanted to do in life. So I think we need to keep experimenting with that. I think there is promise for that, but it's not out yet whether that's the best method. A robo-tax is something that Bill Gates and others have advocated. I think some kind of tax scheme that equips the government to help with that transformation is useful, whether that's a robo-tax, pegged to every robot or AI device that you hire is, that's a tricky proposition because you're penalizing efficiency gains in a corporation, right? And then the entrepreneur in me kicks in and says, that's not right either. That's disincentivizing me to compete well, right? So it's a wickedly complex question. It's very high value and we're working on it, but there is no answer just yet. The purpose in society. I think that's tied to this. Why are we all here? Why are we part of a society? This notion that human beings are always just out for their own personal interests is misconceived. Anthropological experiments have found that we actually like being interdependent and being in that social network. And I think, who better positioned than TDC to actually make that happen, right? But it's got to go far beyond putting devices in people's hands. And so I think that purpose of reinventing, reimagining, reframing that human network, I think that's a great charter, purposeful charter for TDC.
All right, we'll also open up if there are any questions from the room here. And otherwise, while we wait, we have a couple more questions here. One of them is about what can we learn from history in terms of guiding us forward? You talked a lot about values. Where can we look back to history to seek a direction forward?
We've always evolved and we've always upgraded our value system. So that is nothing new. We've also always upgraded our work schemes. We've ditched some jobs and we've invented new jobs. That itself is not new either. What is new is the fact, that this is now getting into our heads. We've previously replaced different ways of working physically. Now we're replacing different ways of working mentally with our brains. And that feels uncomfortable because we always thought the brain was untouchable. There is only one human brain. Now we're finding, parts of that brain are very well replaceable. And that's new and that's scary. The second new thing is the speed at which this happens. And so yes, we have always created new jobs, but there's always been fallout as well. And then we've caught that fallout. Now we've accelerated that cycle. It's coming faster. Can we mitigate the fallout fast enough? As I said before, governments are so far ill-prepared to catch this. It's nowhere in the public discourse in the United States. Nowhere, right? I want to say to Mr. Trump, it's not Mexicans, it's machines you should worry about. And, worry about in the good sense, right? In that there's lots of opportunity. But that's where the displacement is going to happen, not immigration. But of course, that's not a good political headline, right? Much easier to rail against immigrants. And so I think there is, we got to rethink that. But speed and, as we say, getting inside your brain, that's what's new. And we got to watch that. That's mental labor. So what's the next refuge for humans then? If we don't shape this, if we don't govern it, then where do we go from here? And so I think that, that's probably the third aspect is that we feel like we're backed into a corner. And we don't have to be backed into a corner, but that means we got to get in front of this thing.
Yes, hello. If I ask you 5 years ago, where do you see the AI development will be? And when I ask you now, has it exceeded your expectations or not? And if not, what has been the main obstacles?
So I think deep learning is probably the biggest innovation in AI, and that goes back a little further than 5 years. But that certainly has taken off like wildfire, and it was essentially a breakthrough that is now getting scaled out throughout society. When you go to China, it's very pervasive, right? China is not about, in AI, it's not about breakthrough innovation, it's about application at scale. And so the scale at which this breakthrough innovation has been applied throughout all areas of life has been a surprise for most of us. I think it is also a surprise to many who are not technical and don't read about technology every day. And, dare I say, that's probably most of the population, right? Normal people, right? To them, it's surprising also that this is sort of coming out of left field now, because this has been very hidden deep in the bowels of enterprises. Because, as I showed you in the earlier graph, it's reinventing processes and applications and platforms. And as such, it was invisible to many consumers. And then they see, yeah, my music service is giving me better recommendations. That's nice. Google Translate has had a, 70% efficiency or effectiveness improvement since they put deep learning into it. And that's nice. But nobody, amongst regular consumers, nobody asks, how did that happen? And, how do I extrapolate that? Why is that meaningful? So that's also why people are surprised. So I'm personally just surprised at the scale of it in some parts of the world. So we're now waiting for the next breakthrough, and we don't know where that's going to come from. Computer scientists are sort of saying, well, don't put the pressure on us because it's taken us so long just to generate, these few breakthroughs that we have had. I think the next breakthrough that's going to surprise me, going to surprise us, is going to come out of neuroscience and brain science, rather than out of computer science. Because as we understand the brain better, with the help of computers, of course, and simulate that better, I think there's going to be revolutionary insights there that are going to then have spillover into computer science and into the way we work. Yeah.
And just a short comment on that. Just recently, I saw Blade Runner. If you know the movie Blade Runner. Yeah. So it's about these AI robots, right? AI-driven robots with feelings and all that. It's a fairly reasonably old movie. I think these concepts, there have been a lot of ideas and conceptualization of how AI would play a part in our lives, right? You also have to remember that in Blade Runner, it's actually a human that kind of does the Turing test on the machine. So it's a live conversation where through 500 questions, a human then narrow in, is this a machine or not? So this human-machine interaction has also been conceptualized for quite some time. These types of methods, they are from the 50s, where you also had some of these ideas. I just think that throughout time, as we gradually progress and incorporate these types of technologies, just like you are saying, Olaf, our expectations, they also increase, and increase dramatically. Because suddenly you don't even question like Google Maps, right? I only have to type in one letter and it pinpoints exactly where I want to go. It knows where I want to go. They also start to ask me if it was a nice restaurant and stuff like that. Automatically, that's not the AI part, that's a pretty simple rule, but it's just these types of things, you don't even think about it anymore. Fastest route, most efficient in terms of fuel consumption routes, all that stuff. This is AI in technology, self-driving cars and so on. It's just this happens, and then we as humans, we just project the next. We're not satisfied with being quite advanced at this point in time. we always look at the next level. So that's why, of course, also a lot of thinking is going into super intelligence and so on, all that world, even though we are actually quite advanced. So yes, as you're also stating, it's difficult to state where we are in 5 years.
There's so much happening right now, it's really hard to predict, but I would say if you look at places like China, if you look at places like even Nigeria, look at places like Israel, there are a lot of AI innovations that are happening right now that could get transported over here, right? So we've talked to, for instance, in the area of medicine and health, we've talked to a startup called BrainQ out of Israel. Israel has a phenomenal depository of young people that are innovating in digital, as most of you probably know, born out of military digital capabilities. And they're now inventing algorithms that can help understand traumatized brains, which neurons, which synapses are not connected, and what are the frequencies that are needed to regrow that connection. And then they can feed that into an MRI and essentially hit the brain with certain frequencies so that it will regrow those connections. So that you can, people who've been traumatized by way of an accident or, some kind of military incident, that they can regrow certain capabilities. Let's say, you've been traumatized in your brain and you can't move your arm anymore. They're actually able to demonstrate with experiments on rats that they can regrow these connections so that rats will be able to walk again. And so they're trying to bring that into human medicine, right? Those are breakthroughs that are sort of combinations of machine learning and medical applications that will be very surprising to us when they happen. There is a startup out of Nigeria in mobile commerce that uses AI to help people who are illiterate recognize what's in a picture, how costly it is and where to buy it. And it's all done by voice. And so they can empower illiterate parts of the population to become part of a market. And as soon as you have a part of a market, you have a voice, right, in the economy. And that's immensely empowering. So that kind of thing, I think, will also be surprising, right?
Yeah. Do you know the author Yuval Noah Harari? He has written the book *Sapiens* and the what is it called? The second one.
Yeah.
He has this reflection about the human. It's kind of like paradoxical. The basic human experience as a gatherer and hunter. It was very profound in sort of a way, and then we became farmers, and so on and so forth. And every time we moved a bit forward, we left something better behind. He has like a notion of that. We gained something and we sub-optimized our current situation, but moved to a sort of like a worse place in some regards. I don't know if you're familiar with that concept in his book, *Sapiens*. This human condition of sub-optimizing, that reflection I would like to hear your take on, also in this context, because you also took the example on Facebook with this therapist. You get lured into artificial technology, and if it's embedded inside capitalist interest and stuff like that, you can produce more services, and you can have more applications for this, but the human condition might deteriorate. Do you have a point?
Yeah, I don't disagree. I don't disagree with the notion. Now, to be fair, we've always changed, and we will continue to change. And if you were to meet somebody from 100 years ago, they would probably look at you like an alien, right? Because the nature of who we are and how we talk and what we refer to in our life experience every day is so vastly different. Does that mean it's bad or good? It's just the way it is. There's some good and some bad in this. I wouldn't want to live the way people lived 100 years ago, but I would completely agree that there were some aspects of that life that were much healthier. In fact, recent studies in the United States have shown that the Amish people, are you familiar with that term, are actually very healthy. They have very little, if any, form of cancer in their communities. There is no excessive drinking, there's no excessive partying. They don't cheat in their relationships. It's, you know, physically a very healthy environment. Now, do you want to live like the Amish do? You know, we do a deal, right? We take more risk. And so I agree. We leave some good parts behind, and we get some other parts that are really good. And it's a deal with the devil that we're making. In the current environment, I would agree that we are about to go overboard when it comes to social media. We are conceiving of the human being as a pure data construct. And that's clearly not healthy. We're so much more. And I think the digital innovators need to become much, much better at understanding the physical and emotional human being. Incidentally, I just got back from teaching a digital strategy workshop at Ferrari with about 30 other companies there. And you know, how do you digitize something like a Ferrari? You know, I'm not saying you should be a fan of Ferraris, but what Ferrari stands for is an emotional experience. Okay, we can have all kinds of talks about status symbol, etc. But when you drive one, you sort of get what's emotion. There's a visceral thing happening. Digital companies don't get that. And they have yet to really acquire that ability to make physical life better for us. So I think what we have left behind is that, and we shouldn't completely leave it behind. We're a natural organism, and you know, our happiness requires that we also serve the physical and the spiritual sides of us, not just the digital side. The digital side is only a sliver of who we really are. And if that's all we get served on, it's a very one-sided thing, right? It's like only training, you know, the right side of your body. What happens to the left side of your body? You're going to walk around with a limp. And that's what's happening with us emotionally, socio-emotionally right now. And so I would agree with that concept, and we have to work on exactly that. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Thanks to both of you, and a special thanks to you, Olaf, for visiting us. Exciting stuff, important stuff for us. So, thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a good conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey. Yeah.